I thought a small lie would protect our happiness. So I never told my husband or his mother that this apartment was actually mine. But when he tossed divorce papers onto the table and gave me 72 hours to vacate his family home, I did not cry. If they had remained loyal, they never would have learned the truth. Now that they have betrayed me, they are about to wish they had never even learned my name. My name is Elena Ford, and at 34 years old, I had built a reputation in Rivergate as an architect who understood the importance of a solid foundation. I spent my days designing steel spines for skyscrapers and ensuring that load-bearing walls could withstand the weight of the world. It was ironic, then, that I failed to notice the structural rot in the one place I was supposed to feel safe. The rain battered the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse, turning the panoramic view of the city into a blurred watercolor of gray and neon. I stood by the glass with a glass of red wine in my hand, watching the storm drown the streets below. The apartment was a masterpiece of modern design, a space of marble floors and minimalist aesthetics that I had curated with obsessive detail. It was silent, save for the rhythmic drumming of the rain, until the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime that sounded like a warning bell. I did not turn around immediately. I expected the familiar sound of Marcus dropping his briefcase, perhaps a sigh of exhaustion after a long day at the small consulting firm I had quietly funded for years. Instead, a violent thud shattered the tranquility. I turned slowly. A thick stack of legal documents lay on the glass coffee table, sliding slightly across the smooth surface before coming to a halt. My husband, Marcus Hale, stood on the other side of the room. His hair was wet, plastered to his forehead, and his expensive suit was damp at the shoulders. But it was his eyes that froze me. They were devoid of warmth, replaced by a cold, sneering hostility I had never seen directed at me. "What is this?" I asked, my voice calm, betraying none of the alarm spiking in my chest. "It is over." "Elena," Marcus said. His voice was steady, rehearsed. "I want out. I am done pretending that this arrangement works." I walked toward the table and looked down at the papers. The word dissolution stared back at me in bold, black ink. I looked up at him, searching for a trace of the man I had married 5 years ago, but he was gone. In his place stood a stranger fueled by a newfound misplaced confidence. "You are divorcing me," I asked. "I am freeing myself." Marcus spat. He took a step forward, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "You are suffocating. You are arrogant, useless, and you have no idea how to be a wife. You walk around here like you are some queen, treating me like I am just an accessory to your perfect little life. Well, I am done being your prop." The accusations were so absurd they almost made me laugh. I had supported him when he was unemployed. I had celebrated his minor victories as if they were triumphs. "Is there someone else?" I asked, cutting through his tirade. Marcus sneered. "Yes, there is someone else. Someone who actually respects me. Someone who is 10 times the woman you will ever be." He paused, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "And do not think I am doing this alone. I spoke to Mother. Valerie agrees with me completely. She said I should have dumped you years ago. She is the one who told me to finally stand up and take back what is mine." The mention of his mother, Valerie, made the picture clear. This was a coordinated strike. "Take back what is yours," I repeated. Marcus puffed out his chest, gesturing grandly to the walls around us. "You have 72 hours to pack your personal effects and leave." "Elena, I want you out. This penthouse. It belongs to the Hale family. It is time we restored the family legacy and brought a real woman into this home." The silence that followed was deafening. He believed it. He truly believed that because I had allowed him to play the lord of the manor actually belonged to him. He had forgotten, or perhaps he had simply chosen to ignore reality. I looked at the rain streaking against the glass, then back at him. A heavy, suffocating sorrow should have crushed me. I should have been on my knees, begging, crying, asking him why I wasn't enough. But as I looked at his flushed, entitled face, the sorrow evaporated. In its place, a cold, sharp clarity settled over me. I did not scream. I did not throw the wine glass. Instead, the corner of my mouth twitched upward into a small, ghost-like smile. Marcus blinked, his confidence faltering for a split second. Why are you looking at me like that? You are right, Marcus, I said softly. 72 hours is plenty of time. He shifted his weight, clearly unsettled by my lack of hysteria. He expected a fight, a breakdown, something that would feed his ego. My silence was a mirror he wasn't ready to look into. They know nothing, I thought, the realization blooming in my mind like a dark flower. They think they are standing on solid ground, but they are standing on a trapdoor I built with my own money. And now it is too late to save themselves. I glanced at the sleek, modern clock on the wall. The second hand ticked rhythmically, marching toward the top of the hour. As the digital display flickered from 11:59 to midnight, the day ended. My marriage was dead, but the game was just beginning. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the city washed in a cold, gray light. But the storm inside my apartment was only intensifying. Less than 8 hours after Marcus had demanded a divorce, the private elevator chimed. The doors slid open and Valerie, my mother-in-law, stepped out. She did not knock. She did not wait to be invited. She walked into the penthouse with the heavy, confident stride of a conqueror claiming new territory. She was wearing a tweed suit that cost more than most people's cars. Yet she looked at my home, my sanctuary, as if she had just stepped into a landfill. She ran a manicured finger along the back of the Italian leather sofa, pulling her hand away with a grimace of exaggerated disgust. "This place? It feels so cold," Valerie sneered, turning her gaze on me. I was standing by the kitchen island, clutching a mug of black coffee, watching the invasion unfold. Typical of you, Elena. No warmth, no soul, just expensive, sterile junk. It is a good thing Marcus is finally taking charge. Marcus stood behind her, looking like a petulant child who had brought his mother to fight his battles. I told her, "Mom," I told her 72 hours. 72 hours is generous, Valerie said, sweeping her gaze around the living room. "We are going to have to gut this entire place. Marcus, we will rip out these pretentious floors and burn this furniture if we have to. We need to purge her energy completely before Tessa moves in." She did not even have the decency to lower her voice. She pulled her phone from her purse, her face lighting up with a sickening sweetness as she dialed. "Tessa, darling, yes. We are here. Come on up. It is time you saw the canvas you get to paint on." I remained silent, acting as the observer in my own life. I watched their eyes, their body language, the way they moved through the space with an unearned sense of ownership. I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to feel victorious. 10 minutes later, the elevator doors opened again. Tessa Monroe walked in. She was 24 years old, glowing with the kind of youth that mistakes arrogance for wisdom. She wore a dress that was too short for the morning and a smile that was too sharp for a greeting. She didn't look at the breathtaking view of Rivergate. She looked directly at me, her eyes sweeping over my silk robe and bare face with open contempt. "So," Tessa said, popping her gum loudly. She held out a hand, palm up. "Where are the keys to my apartment?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Hello to you too, Tessa." Marcus stepped forward, wrapping a protective arm around Tessa's waist. He puffed out his chest, looking from his mother to his mistress, drawing strength from their presence. "Do not talk to her like you are equals. Elena, you are just packing. You know perfectly well that this penthouse is Hale family property. Honestly, You should be grateful I let you live in such luxury for this long. Most men would have kicked a useless wife to the curb years ago." Tessa giggled, a high, grating sound, and nuzzled her face into Marcus's neck. She looked at me with faux pity. It must be so sad, being your age and having nothing. Being such a loser that you have to cling to a man's coattails just to have a roof over your head. But do not worry, Elena. We will make this place a real home. A home filled with love, not whatever this is. Exactly, Valerie chirped, clapping her hands together. She walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, blocking my view. Marcus, do not worry about the logistics. I have already spoken to our family attorney. We will make sure we wring every single cent out of the marital assets. She will not take a dime of your hard-earned money. We will sue her for emotional distress if she tries to drag this out. My hand slipped quietly into the deep pocket of my robe. My fingers brushed against the cool metal of my phone. I pressed the side button 3 times, a subtle shortcut I had programmed years ago for business meetings, never imagining I would use it against the man I vowed to love forever. A tiny vibration against my thigh confirmed that the voice recorder was active. "You are right," I said, my voice steady, betraying nothing of the firestorm raging in my gut. "I suppose I should just focus on packing." Marcus smirked, mistaking my calm for defeat. Finally, some obedience. I looked at the 3 of them, the mother, the son, and the mistress standing in the center of my living room, planning renovations on a property they did not own, spending money they did not have. They were so confident, so cruel, and so incredibly blind. "Keep talking," I thought, keeping my face as smooth as a frozen lake. "Every word you say is another nail in the coffin I am building for you." While Valerie was busy criticizing the thread count of my curtains and Tessa was taking selfies in the foyer to post for her followers, I slipped away into the master bedroom. I locked the door behind me, the click of the latch sounding loud in the sudden silence. They thought I was retreating to cry, to pack, to crumble under the weight of their cruelty. In reality, I was simply moving to the next phase of the operation. I walked into the walk-in closet, pushing aside a row of winter coats to reveal the seamless panel in the wall that Marcus had never noticed in our 5 years of marriage. He was a man who looked at things but never really saw them. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner hidden beneath a false light switch. With a soft pneumatic hiss, the wall slid open to reveal a steel safe. My hands did not shake as I dialed in the combination. Inside lay the foundation of my defense, a paper trail I had maintained with the precision of a structural engineer. I pulled out the first file. It was a thick blue folder containing the original deed to the penthouse. It stated, in indisputable legal language, that the property, including the land rights, the structural shell, and every square inch of the interior, belonged solely to Elena Ford. I had purchased this apartment 3 years before I even met Marcus, paid for in full with the bonuses from my first major skyscraper project. There was no mortgage. There was no Hale family money. There was not even a joint bank account associated with the maintenance fees. Next, I removed the prenuptial agreement. Marcus had signed it the week before our wedding, barely glancing at the pages as he laughed about how unromantic paperwork was. He had forgotten it existed. I had not. Finally, I retrieved the loan agreement. It was a promissory note for $250,000, money I had lent to Marcus to seed his consulting firm when he claimed the banks were being unreasonable. He had signed it, promising to repay the principal plus 4% interest within 36 months. That deadline had passed 6 months ago. I carried the stack of documents to my vanity table and picked up my phone. I dialed Harper Linwood, my personal attorney and the most vicious litigator in Rivergate. She answered on the first ring. "Elena," Harper said, her voice crisp and alert. "I assume the storm has made landfall." "It is worse than we predicted," I said, flipping through the loan agreement to check the date. "They are all here. Valerie, Marcus, and the mistress. They have given me 72 hours to vacate. They are claiming the apartment is Hale family property." Harper let out a dry, humorless laugh. "On what grounds delusion?" "Essentially," I replied, "I need you to activate the emergency litigation protocol. Immediately. I want a freeze on all assets associated with my name. And I want a forensic audit of the joint accounts started an hour ago." "Done," Harper said. "But Elena, there is something else. My contact at the precinct just tipped me off. Valerie has been making inquiries about filing a restraining order against you. She was asking about the specific criteria for proving domestic instability and mental harassment." I paused, my finger hovering over Marcus's signature on the loan document. I was not shocked. I was only surprised by the sheer audacity of their stupidity. They were not just trying to kick me out, they were planning to ruin my reputation to ensure I could never fight back. "So their plan is to frame me to justify the theft," I said coolly. "Why am I not surprised? We are not going to let them get that far," Harper promised, the sound of typing furiously in the background coming through the speaker. "I am pulling the files now. I also want permission to subpoena Marcus's private credit card statements. If he has a mistress, he is bleeding money somewhere." "Do it," I commanded. "I want to know every cent he has spent on Tessa Monroe, every dinner, every hotel room, every cheap piece of jewelry. If he bought her a pack of gum with marital funds, I want a receipt for it." "I will have the dossier ready by tomorrow morning," Harper said, her voice dropping to a sinister purr. "We will strip them clean by the letter of the law. Elena, by the time we are done, they won't even have the bus fare to leave town." "Thank you, Harper." I hung up the phone and looked at the stack of documents on the table. Outside the door, I could hear Valerie's shrill laughter echoing down the hallway, followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged across my hardwood floors. They were already rearranging the furniture. They were already celebrating their victory. I ran my hand over the cool, crisp paper of the deed. A small, dangerous smile touched my lips. It was not a smile of happiness. It was the smile of a grandmaster who sees the checkmate 10 moves before her opponent even realizes the game has begun. "Enjoy the furniture while you can," I whispered to the empty room. "It is the only thing you will be touching for the rest of your lives." While they were busy measuring my living room for furniture I would never allow them to buy, I was quietly rewriting the rules of engagement from my tablet. I sat in the corner of the guest bedroom, which I had temporarily claimed as my command center, and accessed the smart home mainframe. With a few taps, I reset the master administrative codes. I changed the entry code for the front door, the service elevator passkey, and even the override code for the utility room. The numbers they thought would grant them access were now useless strings of digits. I then pulled up the security interface. The cameras in the hallway and living room were always on, but I had kept the audio disabled for privacy. I tapped the screen, activating high-definition audio recording across the entire system. Instantly, their voices flooded into my noise-canceling headphones, crystal clear and damning. "No, absolutely not." Valerie's voice cut through the feed like a serrated knife. "Tessa, honey, that shade of gray is depressing. We need gold. We need velvet. We need to show people that the Hales have returned to their proper status. But gold is so old," Tessa whined, her voice grating against my eardrums. "I want it to look like an influencer lives here. Valerie, not a museum." "Marcus, tell your mother she is being ridiculous. Well, I think both ideas have merit." Marcus stammered. I watched the video feed. Marcus was standing between them, looking like a man drowning in shallow water. He was trying to appease a mother who controlled him and a mistress who tolerated him, completely unaware that the floor beneath his feet was about to open up. "Stop being so spineless!" "Marcus," Valerie snapped. "Focus on the important thing. Have you called the movers? We need to get her trash out of here. I want Elena on the street by tomorrow afternoon. I do not care if she has nowhere to go. That woman is a parasite." I am handling it. Mom, Marcus said, puffing out his chest in that way he did when he was lying to himself. Besides, there is nothing she can do. This house is definitely Hale property. I remember signing the papers 3 years ago. I signed the deed transfer myself. I paused the feed and minimized the window. I opened my cloud archive and searched for the document Marcus was referring to. I found it in seconds. Document 4B, Spousal Waiver of Interest. I almost laughed out loud. 3 years ago, I had refinanced the apartment to pull out some equity for a new investment. The bank had required Marcus to sign a document acknowledging that he had no legal claim to the property since it was purchased with my premarital funds. He had been so busy watching a football game that day that he had signed it without reading a single word, assuming it was just standard tax paperwork. He thought he was signing onto the deed. In reality, he had signed away any right to ever claim a single square inch of this penthouse. You poor, arrogant fool, I whispered. I switched back to the financial investigation. Harper had already sent over the preliminary access to Marcus's hidden accounts. I began tracing the transactions. It was a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to a precipice. There were monthly transfers of $4,000 to an account under the name Monroe Consulting. I cross-referenced the tax ID. It belonged to Tessa. He had been paying her a salary from our joint savings for consulting services that clearly never happened. That was fraud. That was embezzlement of marital assets. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. 2 weeks ago, there was a deposit of $50,000 into Marcus's personal account. It did not come from a bank. It came from a shell company called Obsidian Ventures. I recognized the name immediately from my work in urban development. They were not investors. They were high-interest predatory lenders, loan sharks who operated just on the edge of the law and enforced their debts with baseball bats rather than court orders. I tracked the outflow of that money. $10,000 to a luxury jewelry store, $15,000 to a 5-star resort in the Maldives booked for next month. He had borrowed money from criminals to fund a fantasy life with his mistress. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. Marcus wasn't just broke. He was underwater with dangerous people, and he was counting on selling my apartment to pay them back. I picked up my pen and wrote a single line in my notebook. They just opened the gates of hell for themselves. I sat in the silence of the guest room, the glowing screen of my tablet casting long, ghostly shadows against the wall. Outside the door, the sounds of Valerie rearranging my living room had finally ceased, likely because they had exhausted themselves with their own greed. But in the quiet, my mind drifted back to the beginning, to the root of the lie that was now strangling us all. People in Rivergate knew me as Elena Ford, the diligent architect. Few knew that I was also Elena Ford, the sole heiress to a shipping fortune that had been quietly compounding since the 1920s. I had spent my entire adult life trying to outrun my last name. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for the staggering number in my trust fund. When I met Marcus 5 years ago, he was charming, ambitious, and devastatingly insecure about his working-class background. He told me once, I could never be with a woman who made me feel small. So, I made myself smaller. I never told him that I bought this penthouse with a single cashier's check for $3,500,000. I told him I was renting to own and that the payments were manageable. I wanted him to feel like the provider, like the man of the house he so desperately wanted to be. I remembered the early days of his consulting firm. He was failing. He was drowning in debt and panic. I could not bear to see him suffer. So I created a labyrinth of shell companies and routed my own capital into his business. I became his silent angel investor. When his firm suddenly landed a major contract worth $200,000, he came home weeping with joy, popping champagne, telling me he was finally a success. I did it. Elena, he had shouted, spinning me around. I did it all on my own. I am so proud of you. I had whispered, swallowing the truth. But success did not make Marcus grateful. It made him monstrous. As the my money poured in, his ego swelled. He stopped asking for my opinion and started giving orders. And behind every act of arrogance stood his mother, Valerie, whispering poison into his ear. I closed my eyes, remembering a dinner from 2 years ago. Valerie had been sitting at the head of my table, swirling her wine. A wife should not have so many opinions. Marcus, she had said, casting a sideways glance at me. You are the CEO now. You need to control the family finances. Elena is too loose with money. She does not understand the value of $1 like we do. Instead of defending me, Marcus had nodded. You are right, Mom. She does not understand business. I had stayed silent then, biting my tongue until it bled. I stayed because I believed that marriage was about endurance. I thought if I just loved him enough, if I just supported him enough, the sweet, gentle man I met in the coffee shop 5 years ago would return. I thought I was being a good wife. In reality, I was just a remarkably efficient enabler. But looking at the financial records on my screen, the evidence of him draining our accounts to buy Tessa diamond earrings and 5-star vacations, something inside me finally snapped. It wasn't the heartbreak. I had processed the grief of losing him months ago when he started coming home smelling of cheap vanilla perfume. No, this was not grief. This was insult. He had taken my love, my patience, and my secret financial support, and he had used them to build a pedestal for himself. And now, he was using the very foundation I built to humiliate me. He wasn't just leaving me, he was trying to erase me from my own life, convinced he was the king of a castle I had allowed him to occupy. I stood up and walked to the mirror. The woman staring back was not the victim they thought she was. She was the landlord. I did not stay silent because I was weak. Marcus, I said softly to the empty room, I stayed silent because I wanted you to be a man. But since you insisted on being a child, I will treat you like one. My pain had crystallized into a cold, hard purpose. I didn't want to hurt them physically. That was too crude. I wanted to strip away the illusions. I wanted to take back every single thing that belonged to me, my home, my money, my dignity, and leave them standing in the wreckage of their own entitlement. I picked up the tablet and authorized the final transfer of the evidence to my lawyer. The mourning period was over. The eviction was about to begin. The morning sun flooded the penthouse living room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, but the atmosphere was anything but bright. I sat in the single armchair facing the long leather sofa, my back straight, my hands folded calmly in my lap. On the glass coffee table between us sat a thick stack of documents, each one stamped with a bright red seal. At 9 o'clock sharp, they emerged. Marcus looked disheveled but arrogant. Valerie was already dressed in a sharp business suit as if prepared for a board meeting, and Tessa trailed behind them in a silk robe that belonged to me, holding a cup of coffee. Well, Marcus said, buttoning his cuffs as he looked down at me, I assume this little gathering is your surrender. You have decided to leave early so we can start the renovations. Valerie smirked, tapping her watch. Smart choice. Elena, why drag out the inevitable? Just hand over the keys and the security codes, and we can avoid the embarrassment of the police dragging you out. I did not stand up. I simply gestured to the paperwork on the table. I have made a decision regarding my departure, I said, my voice eerily calm. I will be leaving this apartment, but only after the 3 of you have been removed from the premises permanently. For a second, there was total silence. Then, Marcus threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, barking sound of genuine amusement. You have completely lost your mind, Marcus chuckled, shaking his head at Tessa. She is delusional. The stress has finally snapped whatever was left of her brain. I am not joking. Marcus, I said. I picked up my phone and tapped the screen once. I just sent an email to all of you. It contains 3 attachments. I suggest you open the first one. It is titled Proof of Ownership. Marcus rolled his eyes, pulling out his phone with a sigh of exaggerated patience. Fine. If looking at a piece of paper will make you shut up, I will. Wait. His voice trailed off. His thumb froze on the screen. The color drained from his face so rapidly that he looked like a wax figure melting in the heat. What is it? Valerie snapped, leaning over his shoulder. This date, Marcus stammered, his eyes darting from the screen to me. This deed is dated October of 2019. That is a year before we even met. Read the name on the title. Marcus, I commanded softly. Elena Ford, he whispered. Sole owner. Paid in full. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You owned this place the whole time. Before me. Before the marriage, I bought it with my own money, I said, locking eyes with him. And that document you signed 3 years ago, the one you thought was a formality that was a spousal waiver, you legally acknowledged that this apartment is my separate property and you have zero claim to it. You trapped him, Valerie shrieked, her composure shattering instantly. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her face twisting into a mask of fury. You deceitful little witch. You planned this, you guy bay my son. You knew we would try to claim it, so you set a trap. I raised an eyebrow. I simply protected what was mine. But speaking of planning, Valerie, perhaps you should listen to this. I pressed a button on the remote control in my hand. The surround sound speakers, which they had planned to rip out, came to life. Valerie's voice, crisp and high definition, filled the room. We need to purge her energy completely before Tessa moves in. We will sue her for emotional distress if she tries to drag this out. We will wring every single cent out of the marital assets. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Valerie stood frozen, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. She realized in that moment that her malice was no longer a secret. It was evidence. That is illegal, Valerie hissed, though her voice lacked its usual venom. You cannot record us, actually, in this state. I can record anything that happens within my own home for security purposes, I replied coolly. And you were loud enough to be picked up by the hallway sensors. I turned my gaze to Tessa, who was shrinking back into the cushions of the sofa, trying to make herself invisible. And you, Tessa, I said. You asked where the keys to your apartment were. I'm afraid you won't need keys where you are going. But you might need a good criminal defense attorney. I didn't do anything, Tessa stammered, her lower lip trembling. I love Marcus. Is that right? I tapped my tablet, casting a new image onto the large television screen behind me. It was a bank statement. Then why have you been accepting monthly transfers of $4,000 from Marcus's company account? And this one, a $50,000 transfer from a loan shark agency that went directly into your personal checking account last week. Tessa's eyes bulged. She scrambled to her feet, spilling her coffee onto the rug. Marcus told me that was a gift. He said it was his bonus. I didn't know he stole it. I didn't steal it, Marcus roared, turning on Elena. It was a loan. I was going to pay it back once we sold the apartment. You cannot sell what you do not own. Marcus, I said, standing up for the first time. I towered over them, not in height, but in presence. You embezzled funds to pay a mistress, and you took out a predatory loan against a property that belongs to your wife. Do you have any idea what the fraud division is going to do with you? Tessa looked at the screen, then at Marcus, and then she burst into loud, ugly sobs. She realized the free ride was over. The luxury life she thought she had stolen was nothing more than a mirage built on debt and lies. Get out, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. All of you, now, They stood there, paralyzed by the sudden, violent shifting of their reality. The predators had become the prey, and they had walked right into the cage I had built for them. The elevator doors slid open with a decisive swoosh, revealing the final piece of my strategy. Harper Linwood stepped out, flanked by 2 uniformed officers from the Civil Enforcement Division. She did not look like a woman coming for a casual visit. She carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a court order in the other, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the rhythm of a ticking clock. "Good morning," Harper said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room like a scalpel. She did not look at me. Her eyes were locked on the intruders. "I am Harper Linwood, legal counsel for Mrs. Elena Ford. These officers are here to enforce an immediate removal of unauthorized occupants." Marcus stepped forward, his face flushed with a mix of anger and lingering confusion. "Unauthorized. This is my mother, and this is my guest. You cannot just barge into my home with the police." "Your home." Harper raised an eyebrow, a gesture of professional disdain. "According to the deed and the prenuptial agreement currently on file with the county clerk, you are a guest here, Mr. Hale, and your status as a guest has been revoked. As for Mrs. Valerie Hale and Ms. Tessa Monroe, they have no legal standing to be on this property." "They are trespassing," Valerie gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. "Trespassing. I am his mother. I am decorating this place. You cannot kick me out of my son's house." "It is not his house," one of the officers said, stepping forward. His voice was bored, heavy with the routine of dealing with domestic disputes. "Ma'am, we have seen the paperwork. The owner has requested your removal. You can leave voluntarily, or we can assist you. It is your choice." Valerie's eyes darted around the room, frantic. She fumbled for her phone, her long nails clicking against the screen. "I am calling our family lawyer. This is harassment. I will have you disbarred for this." She tapped furiously, but the screen remained dark. She held the phone up, shaking it. "What is wrong with this thing? I have no signal. I had 5 bars a minute ago." I watched her panic from my spot by the window. I had engaged the privacy protocol on the smart home network 5 minutes ago, effectively blocking all unauthorized devices from connecting to the repeater, and the reinforced steel structure of the building made cellular reception notoriously difficult without the booster I had just disabled. She was screaming into a void. Tessa, realizing that the shield of arrogance had shattered, turned on Marcus. Tears began to stream down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "You said this was yours," Tessa screamed, shoving Marcus in the chest. "You told me you owned the building. You told me she was just a squatter. I thought I did," Marcus stammered, looking between the police and his mistress. "Tessa, baby, please, it is just a misunderstanding. I signed papers." "I know I did." "You signed a waiver," Harper corrected him, pulling a crisp document from her briefcase and holding it up for him to see. "You signed away your rights. And frankly, Mr. Hale, ownership of this apartment is the least of your problems right now. We are also filing a formal complaint regarding the misappropriation of marital assets and the embezzlement of funds from the consulting firm Mrs. Ford capitalized for you." Marcus went pale. That was company business. "Paying your mistress a monthly salary is not company business," Harper said coldly. "It is fraud. And since the seed money for your company came from Mrs. Ford's personal trust, you are looking at grand larceny." The room fell into a stunned silence. I stood with my arms crossed over my chest, leaning against the wall. I did not need to say a word. My silence was louder than their screaming. I was the architect, and I was watching the demolition I had scheduled take place exactly on time. "You have 1 hour," the officer announced, checking his watch. 1 hour to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises. If you are not out by then, you will be arrested for trespassing." Valerie looked at Marcus, waiting for him to fix it, but he was staring at the floor. Broken. "Wait," Harper said, pausing as if she had almost forgotten a minor detail. She turned back to Marcus with a look of predatory pity. "There is one more thing. Mr. Hale, my background check on your finances flagged something interesting. That $50,000 you borrowed from Obsidian Ventures." Marcus's head snapped up, terror flooding his eyes. "It seems you missed your first installment payment yesterday," Harper said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The debt has been sold to a collections agency that specializes in aggressive recovery. They have been calling your office all morning. I suggest you find a very deep hole to hide in, because now that you are not the owner of a luxury penthouse, I doubt they will be very patient with you." The blood drained from Marcus's face completely. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, realizing finally that the safety net he thought he had was gone. He wasn't just homeless, he was hunted. "1 hour," I said softly, breaking my silence. The clock is ticking. The illusion of the United Hale family shattered faster than a cheap glass vase dropped on a concrete floor. As the reality of the eviction notice and the looming criminal charges settled over the room, the three of them turned on each other with the ferocity of starving wolves. Valerie was the first to snap. She did not comfort her son. She did not look for a solution. She spun around, her face twisted into a snarl, and slapped Marcus across the face. The sound echoed sharply in the high-ceilinged room. "You idiot!" Valerie screamed, her voice cracking with rage. "How could you be so incompetent? You told me you handled the paperwork. You told me you had her under control. How could you let yourself be outsmarted by a woman?" Marcus held his cheek, staring at his mother with wide, watery eyes. "Mom, I thought I did." "She tricked me. She didn't trick you," Valerie spat. "You are just weak. I should have known you would ruin this. You always ruin everything I try to build for you." While the mother and son tore each other apart, Tessa was already moving. She had grabbed her purse and was frantically shoving her phone and sunglasses into it. She did not look at Marcus with pity or love. She looked at him like he was a contagion she needed to scrub off her skin. "Tessa," Marcus asked, his voice trembling as he saw her backing toward the elevator. "Tessa, where are you going? I need you here. We need to figure this out." Tessa laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. There is no we, Marcus. I didn't sign up for fraud charges. And I certainly didn't sign up to date a man who is about to be homeless and hunted by loan sharks. But you said you loved me," Marcus stammered, reaching out a hand toward her. "I loved the lifestyle, Marcus," Tessa said, pressing the elevator call button repeatedly. "I loved the trips and the jewelry. If you have nothing, then I have nothing to say to you." The elevator doors slid open, and Tessa disappeared inside without a backward glance. She left him standing there, stripped of his ego, his money, and his fantasy. Marcus turned slowly to look at Valerie. The woman who had encouraged him to cheat, who had fueled his entitlement, was now looking at him with pure disgust. The betrayal in his eyes was profound. He had burned down his marriage to please his mother, and now she was standing over the ashes blaming him for the fire. I watched it all from my spot by the wall. I felt no joy. I felt no sorrow. I simply felt the cold satisfaction of a scientist watching a hypothesis be proven correct. They were never a family. They were a coalition of parasites, and without a host to feed on, they were devouring each other. Marcus turned to me, desperation clawing at his throat. He fell to his knees, disregarding the officers watching him. "Elena, please," he begged, tears streaming down his face. "You have to stop this. You can't let them arrest me. You can't let those loan sharks find me. They will kill me." "Elena, we are married. You promised to protect me." I looked down at him. The man I had once adored was now just a pathetic stranger sobbing on my floor. "I promised to love and cherish you," I said calmly. I did not promise to finance your adultery or shield you from the consequences of your own greed. Valerie stepped forward, her eyes blazing. She tried to grab my arm, but one of the officers stepped in between us. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little brat," Valerie hissed, pointing a finger over the officer's shoulder. "You withdraw these accusations right now. You drop this lawsuit and give my son the money he needs, or I swear to God, I will spend every last penny I have to destroy you. I will ruin your career. I will make sure you never work in this city again." I didn't flinch. I simply pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. "Officer," I said to the policeman standing next to me, "did you hear that threat? She just stated her intent to harass and ruin me financially. I would like that added to the official report. Please." "I heard it, ma'am," the officer said, his face grim. He turned to Valerie. "Mrs. Hale, that is enough. Anything you say can and will be used against you. I suggest you stop talking." Valerie's mouth snapped shut, her face paling as she realized she had just handed me more ammunition. Marcus slumped forward, his forehead touching the cold marble floor. A low, guttural sob escaped his throat. He realized the walls were closing in. The exits were sealed. The life he thought he was entitled to had evaporated. I walked over to him, stopping just inches from his hands. I did not touch him. "I used to love you, Marcus," I said, my voice quiet but echoing in the silence. "I would have given you the world if you had just been honest, but you chose to destroy me instead. You chose to humiliate me. You chose to break us." I looked at the officers and nodded toward the door. "Get them out of my house." Marcus was hauled to his feet, weeping like a child. Valerie walked out with her head high, but her hands were shaking uncontrollably. They were escorted out into the hallway, leaving the penthouse silent. Tessa was already long gone. I stood alone in the center of the room. The air felt lighter. The storm was over. The door clicked shut behind the officers, and for the first time in days, the penthouse was truly silent. It was not the empty silence of abandonment. It was the rich, restorative silence of ownership. The air no longer smelled of Valerie's cloying perfume or the sharp tang of Marcus's anxiety. It smelled of rain and freedom. I walked through the living room, stopping at the side table where Valerie had left her stack of fabric swatches. She had chosen a hideous gold velvet, intending to turn my modern sanctuary into a gaudy monument to her own ego. I picked up the swatch book and dropped it into the trash bin without a second thought. I walked to the kitchen and tossed the half-empty bottle of wine Marcus had opened for Tessa into the recycling. Piece by piece, I began removing the physical traces of their invasion. Harper was packing her briefcase at the dining table, her movements precise and efficient. "You know, Elena," Harper said, snapping the gold latches shut. "We have enough evidence to file a separate civil suit for the $250,000 he owes you immediately. We could freeze his personal vehicle and whatever liquid assets he has left by tomorrow. We can make sure he cannot even buy a sandwich." I poured myself a glass of water, my hand steady. "Do it. But there is no rush. Let him sit with the fear for a few days. Let him realize that the safety net is gone. Right now. I just want to breathe." "Understood." Harper nodded, a rare look of admiration crossing her face. "I will draft the paperwork and have it ready for your review on Monday. You did well today. Elena, most people would have cracked under that kind of pressure. I cracked a long time ago." "Harper," I replied softly. This was just me putting the pieces back together in a stronger configuration. After Harper left, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. A notification popped up in my inbox. It was an email from Sterling and Vance, the most prestigious architecture firm in Rivergate. They had heard rumors of my freelance work and the skyscrapers I had ghost designed. The subject line read, "Senior Lead Architect Position." They were offering a partnership track and a salary that made Marcus's consulting fees look like pocket change. I typed a brief, professional reply accepting the meeting. It was the first brick in the new foundation of my life. I spent the afternoon walking through the rooms, visualizing the renovations. This time, I would not ask for Marcus's opinion. I would paint the master bedroom a deep, calming navy. I would rip out the carpet in the guest room and turn it into the library I had always wanted. I would reclaim every square inch of this space. Around 5 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. I checked the monitor and saw Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman from across the hall who possessed sharp eyes and an insatiable thirst for gossip. I opened the door. "Elena, dear," Mrs. Gable said, leaning in conspiratorially, her eyes wide behind her glasses. "I just had to check on you. The doorman told me the police had to drag that woman, the older one in the tweed suit, off the sidewalk. Is that so?" I asked politely. "Oh, yes." Mrs. Gable continued, clearly delighted by the scandal. She was screaming at the building manager, demanding to be let back in. She kept yelling that she owned the building. Then she threw her shoe at the glass doors. They had to put her in the back of a squad car for disorderly conduct. It was quite the show. They took her away about 20 minutes ago. I should have felt a surge of vindictive joy. I should have laughed, but I just felt a mild, distant sense of pity. Valerie had spent her life trying to look like royalty, only to end up being hauled away like a common hooligan. "I am sorry you had to see that, Mrs. Gable," I said with a faint, unbothered smile. "It has been a difficult day, but it is over now. Well, good riddance," she huffed, patting my arm. "You deserve some peace." When she left, I returned to the living room. I sat in the center of the leather sofa, the exact spot where Marcus had thrown the divorce papers at me just 48 hours ago. I ran my hand over the leather. It felt cool and solid. For years, I had walked on eggshells in this room, afraid to upset Marcus, afraid to bruise his fragile ego. Now, the space felt vast. It felt like mine. I looked out at the city lights beginning to flicker on in the twilight. The hardest part was done. I had evicted the parasites. Now, only one thing remained. I had to face Marcus in court one last time to finalize the divorce and ensure he paid for every lie he had told. "Bring it on," I whispered to the empty room. I was no longer the wife trying to save a marriage. I was the architect of my own future, and I was ready to build something magnificent on the ruins of his betrayal. The gavel struck the mahogany block with a sound that felt less like a judgment and more like the severing of a rotting limb. I sat perfectly still, my hands clasped on the table, as Judge Vance delivered the final verdict. The courtroom was cold, sterile, and silent, save for the scratching of the stenographer's machine and the ragged breathing of the man who used to be my husband. "Mr. Hale," the judge said, peering over his spectacles with disdain. "The evidence presented is irrefutable. You knowingly misappropriated funds from your wife's private accounts and embezzled capital from the consulting firm she capitalized. You also violated the clear terms of the prenuptial agreement regarding the division of assets." Marcus slumped in his chair. He looked small, a hollow shell of the arrogant man who had thrown divorce papers at me just a few weeks ago. But the humiliation was not over. Furthermore, the judge continued, turning his gaze to the gallery where Valerie sat, looking pale and aged. "Mrs. Valerie Hale, your documented conspiracy to illegally evict the rightful owner and your harassment of Mrs. Ford carries consequences. You are hereby issued a permanent restraining order and fined $10,000 for attempted unlawful dispossession." Valerie did not scream. She did not argue. She simply stared at the floor, defeated by the very legal system she had threatened to use against me. Then came the final blow, delivered by the person Marcus had destroyed our marriage for. Tessa Monroe took the stand earlier that morning, not as a lover, but as a witness for the prosecution, To save herself from being charged as an accomplice to embezzlement, she had turned on Marcus with vicious efficiency. He told me the money was his. Tessa had testified, refusing to even look at Marcus. He lied to everyone. I was just a victim of his manipulation. It was a lie, of course. Tessa knew exactly where the money came from, but watching Marcus's face crumble as his mistress threw him to the wolves was a justice poetic enough that I did not need to intervene. The judge's final ruling was absolute. Marcus was stripped of his ownership in the consulting firm, which was dissolved to pay off creditors. He was ordered to repay the $250,000 he owed me, plus legal fees. Since he had no cash, the court ordered the liquidation of his personal assets, his luxury car, his collection of watches, and even the meager savings he had hidden away. The plaintiff, Mrs. Elena Ford, is confirmed as the sole and exclusive owner of the penthouse property. The judge declared, "The defendant is to vacate any claim to the residence immediately." Case closed. Walking out of the courthouse, the afternoon sun felt blindingly bright. I put on my sunglasses, ready to hail a cab and finally start the rest of my life. But a desperate voice called out from behind me, "Elena." I turned. Marcus was standing on the bottom step of the courthouse, looking disheveled and frantic. He took a step toward me, his hands shaking. "Are you happy now?" he choked out, tears mixing with the sweat on his face. "You took everything. My company, my money, my reputation. You even turned my mother against me. You have ruined my life. Elena." I hope you are satisfied. I looked at him, searching for any spark of the love I once held. There was nothing, just pity for a man who had everything and threw it away for an illusion of power. "I did not ruin your life." "Marcus," I said, my voice steady and cold. "You did that the moment you decided I was not a partner, but a target. I simply returned exactly what you gave to me. But I did it using the law." I turned my back on him and walked away, his sobbing fading into the noise of the city traffic. That evening, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of my penthouse. The city of Rivergate was a sea of glittering lights below me. The apartment was quiet, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with potential. The walls were mine. The view was mine. The future was mine. I took a sip of water, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over my shoulders. Finally, I realized that revenge is not about destroying someone else. I thought as I watched the traffic flow like a river of light. It is about taking back the life they thought they had the right to steal. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please comment your city or country below so we can connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.